This evening, I'm going to be speaking on Jesus Makes the Deaf Hear. So we've got 16 hours worth of rock and roll music for you. And if you're not deaf by the end of it, no, I'm joking. I'm going to be using Mark 7, verse 31 to 37 as the kind of the kickoff verse. So if you've got your bits of paper and you'd like to ruffle them if you have an iPad so I can hear you flipping through the papers, that would be marvelous. There are some iPad apps and they beep, don't they, when they flip paper like that, and they flip the magazines. But it's kind of odd these days when you ask people to turn in their Bibles. Half the people get these electronic things out and you can't hear a thing, so you're not quite sure if they got there or not. Usually, and they kind of in the past when you preached and people had normal Bibles, you would hear the ruffling of papers, and then as soon as it started to settle down, you knew most people had got there. So it's kind of disconcerting. So Mark 7, verse 31 to 37 said, "Again, he went out from the region of Tyre and came to Sidon in the Sea of Galilee, to the region of the Decapolis. And they brought him one who was deaf and spoke with difficulty, and they implored him to lay his hands on him. Jesus took him aside from the crowd," which is fascinating. You watch a lot of healing evangelists, and they will take him right in the middle of the crowd, aside from the crowd by himself, and put his fingers in his ears. I love this bit. "And after spitting, he touched his tongue with the saliva, and looking up to heaven with a deep sigh, he said to him, 'Ephphatha.'" That's hard enough to say, really, isn't it? And that is, "be opened." And his ears were opened, and the impediment of his tongue was removed, and he began speaking plainly. And he gave them orders not to tell anyone, which he did often, but the more he ordered them, the more widely they continued to proclaim it. They were utterly astonished, saying, "He has done all things well. He makes even the deaf hear and the mute speak." Now, I don't know about you. I've got a board coming in a minute. I'm going to draw the ear for you. But have you ever had something, water in your ear, and it goes all funny and you can't hear anything? Yeah. Have any of you ever pierced your eardrum? Any of you ever done that? I've done that before when I was little, with cotton wool buds. And I didn't push hard. It just went like that. And I'm like, oh, my goodness. So just be aware, they're not very good for your ears. I found that out the hard way, and it took ages for it to heal. But if you've ever done it, you'll know the difficulty and the disability that comes with not being able to hear people speaking properly. In fact, some of you that struggle with your hearing will know that all too well, that you'll be talking to somebody and you're really desperately trying to hear the words they're saying, and if you don't quite catch it right, then you end up getting the wrong end of the stick, and they think you're a bit of an idiot and they haven't got it, and they start speaking you more plainly. And for those of you that have never had that problem, but you speak maybe on occasions to somebody that is struggling to hear, there is a tendency to start talking really plainly to make sure they hear you. And there's this, I used to do it in hospitals all the time and catch myself doing it and thinking, what am I doing? If they can't hear me, they can't hear me. But there's this tendency to try and really hard to talk to somebody because something's gone wrong in their hearing and their anatomy, and they can no longer hear. Now, I'm going to draw you an ear. There are particular groups among you, apparently, that really enjoy the medical part of this. So I'm sorry that it's not over there. Maybe in a few weeks' time, if I do another one or two of these, I can do it. But I'm going to draw you the ear and a bit of the anatomy of the ear so you can see what's going on in the ear. So here's an ear. It's rough, all right? Pictionary, maybe, I don't know. Okay, and you've got an ear canal, which runs a little bit like this. And then you've got an eardrum, which is usually at a slight angle, a bit like that. So there's your eardrum. There's the drum, okay, and that's the external ear canal, okay, and at this point here you have something which is known as the hammer, the malleolus, and then there are basically three bones in the ear, and they transmit to what's known as the stapes, and the stapes connects onto the cochlea. And the cochlea is the vestibular apparatus here, which is basically your balance. And then the cochlea is this kind of swirling thing that comes up here. And then the eustachian tube, and all that. So that's the ear. There's the cochlea. I'm going to move out the way in a second. Okay, there's the balance stuff. So this is your balance sensors. That's the bit that hears. And This is the bit, when you swallow and you hear that little click, and when you're on the airplanes and you're trying to yawn, that's that bit here that opens up into your mouth area, and if that gets blocked, that's why when you go in the pressure areas, your ear starts to hurt. That's what that's going on there. And so this is the eardrum. It transmits through the bones to the cochlea. The cochlea has got this little fluid in it and lots of different hairs of different lengths, and so it picks up the frequency vibrations and separates them all out, and then that gets transmitted through a nerve all the way to your brain. So there is an ear, there is a canal by which you kind of transmit the sound, so it's focused into the canal. The drum vibrates these bones, it connects to the cochlea. The cochlea picks up the signal, sends it to the brain, and then you hear. Very clever how the whole system works. So those of you that are fascinated, it now looks like a squiggle of lines. It's great, isn't it? But that is how the eardrum works. So if, for example, there's something that goes wrong with this part here and you can't transmit the sounds, some of the new medical apparatus is actually to insert an electrode into the cochlea, which is known as a cochlear implant, and they can actually make people hear. So do you want to hear a deaf girl? Do you want to watch a deaf girl hear? For the first time. The video clip, which they're going to put on at the back, and this is a cochlear implant that they've put in a hospital. This girl was basically deaf from about 8 weeks old and has never heard her own voice, never heard anything, and they switch it on for the first time. She's around. 9.5 million views that has on YouTube. This girl that just got somebody to record it on a phone. This is the first time my implant's going to be turned on, and her reaction to hearing for the first time. She's going to hear her mother's voice for the first time. She will hear the cry of her baby. We live in a hearing world, car alarms, fire bells, alarm clocks, telephones. We live in a world where hearing is part of everyday life and is necessary for everyday life. If somebody's walking down the street and you see them walking into the road and you say, watch out, if they can't hear you, they're going to carry on walking. The cry, fire, is fine for most people, but somebody who's deaf won't hear you. We live in a hearing world. And for those of you that are struggling with your hearing or are indeed deaf, you will know what it's like to live in a world where you are in some way inhibited by your hearing. Now, there are ways of coping. There are ways of kind of working around it. And one of the ways by which people who cannot hear communicate is through sign language. And sign language is even going off in this very room right now. Now, it's interesting that if you cannot hear, the way to communicate is through signs. So if you cannot communicate through the word, then you need a sign. If you cannot hear words, you need signs. And so words can communicate through signs, so that people who are deaf can hear. But when you can hear the word, you no longer need a sign. How many of you are asking God for a sign? It's a jolly good question, isn't it? When I was sitting preparing this, all of this was coming out and thinking, ooh, that's fun. Those of you that kind of, if you do speak or you do like doing this sort of thing, I get so excited by these things. And some of you aren't quite as excited as I am about this. Think of it this way. If you cannot hear God, you need a sign. But if you can hear God, you don't need a sign. If you can hear his word, you don't need a sign. But if you think you can't hear his word, you will ask for a sign. The question is, has God spoken and can you hear him? And that is the big question when it comes to how does this all work with Jesus making the deaf hear?